Hey, Startup 260. This is Professor Jensen here. I welcome you to Computer Science 260, Web Programming. I'm going to be your instructor for this class as I share my 30 years of industry experience with you to hopefully guide you through the process of building amazing web applications. To start things off, I want to ask you this question. Why are you here? What brings you to Computer Science 260? Why are you interested in web application development? And the answer to that is completely personal. And it may be because you're just looking to get a good grade, to look good on your transcript. Maybe because you're trying to dig really deep into web technology so that you can do some awesome stuff in industry. Maybe just because you were interested and wondered what it was all about. Whatever the answer is, it doesn't really matter to me. The important thing is that you're intentional in why you're here. That as you go throughout the semester, you remember that so that it can motivate you to accomplish the goals that you set for yourself, whatever those goals may be. Because things are going to get hard. There's going to be a lot of work to actually do. You're going to have competing things going for your time, both at school and also in your personal life. And you need to make sure that as those come up, you're able to think back and remember why exactly you wanted to be here in Web Programming 260. So with that said, I'd like to answer the question about why I'm here. And the answer to that is pretty simple. My Heavenly Father has blessed me to be able to use web programming to have a very interesting and exciting career, to be able to learn all sorts of wonderful things, interact with awesome people, be able to travel throughout the world and gain experiences that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And also along the way, be able to provide for my family and just live a great life. So I want to be able to share those things with you so that the next generation of web programmers can have the same benefits and blessings that my Heavenly Father has blessed with me. So the short answer is I'm here for you. I want to introduce this person, Tim Cook. Tim Cook's the CEO of Apple, and he said in an interview a while back with Apple Insider that when hiring, we look for the ability to collaborate, creativity, curiosity, and expertise. So Tim's mentioning 4 things that he thinks is really important. The first one is that you've got to be able to collaborate. You've got to be able to work with other people. Web application development is definitely a team effort. You've got to pull in people from marketing and legal and business, not to mention the artists, the designers, the programmers, and make something that the entire team can work together towards building. That's a collaborative environment. Web programming isn't done by one person in a closet. It's done by people who know how to interact with each other and to talk with each other, to share ideas and exponentially increase their result based upon feeding back on each other's experience. The next area, creativity, shows that web programming is really an artistic endeavor. This is something that isn't just technical. This isn't just math put together. There's a whole lot of art to it. And I'm not just talking about like making the application look good. I'm talking about the art of actually defining how your code is set up in a way that actually makes sense, that amplifies what its purpose is and makes it clear what people are doing. It's kind of like chiseling out of marble a beautiful sculpture that people can actually use to make the world a better place. Curiosity is something that you also need in order to be successful as a web programmer. You need to be able to think, why does it work that way? Is there a better way for it to work? Is there something I could change that would make this easier to do next time? Is there a way that I can reproduce something that someone else has actually done? And how exactly did they do that? Curiosity will take you a long way if you let it lead you in the right direction. And the final area that Tim mentions is expertise. And this is where the technology comes into play. You have to know how to actually make things work. You have to be able to have experience with different technologies and be able to pick which one is the right solution for the problem that you're actually able to attack. But that's only like 1/4 of what you're actually trying to focus for. Well, Tim really echoes my thoughts on what makes a good web programmer, but I usually express it this way. I look at it as a whole broken into 4 different quadrants. So you have technology, you have art, you have social, and discovery. Technology is the skills, art is the creative part of actually building a web application. Social requires you to interact with other people, and discovery means you're looking for lifelong learning. You want to be able to satisfy your curiosity and dig deep into topics all the time. And if you try and focus only in one of those areas, like if all you care about is the tech, like knowing how the technology works, then you're never really going to be successful. Likewise, if you ignore the tech and just work on like learning new things and you never actually do anything with those, you're just discovery focused, then you also will never be able to be really successful. So as you work throughout the class, think about these 4 areas and try and integrate effort into all of them. Get to know the people around you, get to know the people on the discussion groups, and share ideas with them, bounce things off with them, trying to include them in your discovery, your artistic, creative creations, and also sharing information about the technology. Some formalities about the class. So it's broken up into kind of 2 parts. Canvas is used to actually submit your assignments and to review your grades and also to review the syllabus. That's it. It's just kind of a structure for submitting and recording grades. The real stuff happens over in GitHub. But before I talk about that, I want to talk about 4 things that you're going to be necessary in order to be successful in the class. First one is that you got to have a developed machine that you can actually build web applications on. This usually has to be some reasonable laptop or desktop machine that has some hard drive space available, it has some free memory, and has some processing power that's reasonable. The one I use is a base MacBook Air M1 model, so that's their 3-year-old model. It's only got 4 gigabytes of RAM on it, but it runs great. It can do all of this stuff, no problem. So if you have something along that lines, you're perfectly good. The next thing is that you're going to have to spend a little bit of money. We're going to run your server in a cloud hosting environment called Amazon Web Services, where you'll actually spin up a server and you'll be using that to run your website from. And that's going to cost a little bit of money, somewhere between $20 to $50. Now, if you don't have an Amazon Web Service account, then you can create one the first time, and you will only need to, and pretty much everything will be covered in their free tier. So you probably won't have to pay anything for this class if you don't already have an Amazon Web Service account. One thing I will note at this point is that's something you should do today. You should go, if you don't have an Amazon Web Service account, you should go and create one so that you've got that up and running and you've got some experience with how to get that going before you actually have to start using it. So go check out Amazon Web Services, create your account today. The next part is late submissions. We have a standing policy of 10% being taken off immediately on the day that you haven't turned in your assignment if you're late. But more important to me is the idea that the real penalty is that by being late, you're actually cramping the next assignments that are coming up. Every one of our projects or deliverables that we have in the class build on top of each other. And so if you're late with one, you're eating into the time for the next one, which is going to make you even later for that one until finally you just won't be able to catch up. So don't worry about the late penalty, more worry about being late, period. And so when you learn something, when the instruction is done, make sure you go and implement that in your deliverable and get it going before the due date is even made so that you don't have to run up into that and start to get frustrated that you haven't been able to do things the amount of time. The key to that is by doing things consistently throughout the class. Don't wait 2 weeks along and then put all your effort into the night before the submission is due, but instead, put a little bit of time in every day so that you're keeping ahead of things and on schedule. The final thing that I'll mention is that my philosophy with learning is that you want to focus on mastery and not grades. Grades are just a symptom of your mastery. If you've mastered something, the grades will follow. But when you put your focus on the grades, typically you forget about mastery and you just try to optimize the grade result without actually learning as much as possible. So try and put your focus on mastery as much as possible. Do I understand the concepts? Can I actually use them? Can I teach someone else about them? Those are all symptoms of mastery. Grades are all just A, B, C, D. Who cares? Who cares? With the realization, not to minimize that you do have to get good grades in order to accomplish goals that you set for yourself. But like I said, mastery is a leading indicator of getting good grades. So focus on that first and let the grades follow. All right, here's the main technologies that we're actually going to cover in this class. We're going to start out with what's called HTML, or Hypertext Markup Language. This is the structural language that defines what a web application actually is composed of. So you'll define elements that tell you where your text is laid out, how they're laid out, what kind of input elements the user can use to actually give application to the feedback, and then what elements the application can actually use to give users information. We'll take that structural representation by the HTML elements and we'll add styling to it using cascading style sheets, or CSS. This is what makes it look good. This is what makes it reactive when you resize your window. This is what makes it so that it's animated whenever the user interacts with it. Stylish sheets make your web application come alive. The programming language that we use to create interactivity between the application and the user is called JavaScript. This is what will read what the user inputs, manipulate it somehow, add it with data from all over the web, and then give a result back to the user. So JavaScript is our programming language for web applications. And we'll use that both on what we call the front end, ran in the browser, and on the back end, run in your service. And that brings us to web services. So this is your server that's actually running on your Amazon Web Service account that your browser application will communicate with to actually store data, to compute things, and to authenticate users and that kind of stuff. So that's web services. And you'll also call third-party web services to do things like get stock quotes, do spell checking, tell a joke, anything like that. So using third-party web services is also part of what we'll actually talk about in this class. Next comes data storage. As you acquire data from your browser application, your front-end application, and send it to the back end on your server, you want to store that somewhere. So if your server restarts or goes down, then you're able to pull that data up from a persistent storage place, a database, and be able to return that to your user. Then we'll talk about authentication. If you're going to store user data, you better make sure that you're respecting the privacy of that user and be able to have them authenticate to tell you who they are so that you can make sure they are who they are before you start serving up their data to them. After that, we'll talk about WebSockets. WebSockets allows you to push information from your back end, your web service, into your front end so that you can send notifications, for example, like new stock quotes come in, or you can actually have two different browsers, both sending data to the server and then propagating that data back out to the client so that you can do things like peer-to-peer real-time chat. The final thing or final technology deliverable that I have in this class is to use a modern web framework. In this class, we'll use a framework called React, which will allows you to create modular representations of your application and componentize things in a way such that your application really becomes much more functional and easy to maintain and produce. So those are the main technologies. Now, underneath those technologies, we have some underlying things. This includes use of the command line, sometimes called a terminal or a console that represents a textual interface where you can execute programs, chain them together, have their outputs interact with each other. This is a really powerful web developer tool that you'll need or want to master so that you can be very effective as a web application developer. We'll use our command line to actually run two programs. One's Git and the other one is GitHub. Git is a code repository that allows you to store versions of your applications as you're developing them. That way, if you make mistakes, you can roll back to a previous version and start over again without losing all of your work or being confused because you got your code all in a very spaghetti state. GitHub moves that version repository off from your local server, your local development environment, onto a cloud or network server so that you can have it backed up there, but also so that you can collaborate with other users. So multiple users can access the same GitHub repository and work on the code together. Next comes web servers. So actually, if you're going to host a web service in Amazon, you have to spin up an actual computer in Amazon, which is your web server that hosts your web service for actually hosting your web application. So we're going to learn how to acquire and build web servers. The language that is used to talk between a front-end application running in the browser and your back-end application running on your web server is called HTTP. And that's just a protocol that allows the data to be sent back and forth between those two efficiently. HTTPS is the secure version of HTTP. That makes it so that anyone listening on the network can't actually intercept that data because it's all encrypted. Next part is what's called domain names. When you talk to a website, you like to call it by a name like byu.edu, for example, rather than like some sort of IP address or number. So creating your own domain name is part of setting up your web application. It makes it so that when you ask for byu.edu, you actually end up with the computers here at Brigham Young University. The next one is web certificates. You need a way to authenticate or make sure that when you talk to the website that you reach with byu.edu, that you're actually talking to Brigham Young University, for example, and not talking to hacker.com pretending to be Brigham Young University. And that's done through web certificates. Next, we'll spend a bit of time talking about web design. What makes a good web application? What makes it so that they're interactive and useful and the user doesn't get frustrated? What makes it so that they perform well, so that they look good and they're enjoyable to use? And finally, we're going to sprinkle in security throughout our entire discussion of web applications. Security needs to be on the forefront of your mind in everything that you do, because without security, as good as your application may be, as cool functionality it provides, or as performant it is, if somebody can attack that and destroy what you're doing or intercept and steal the data what your users are putting into it, then your application doesn't work at all. So being security minded is an important time, and we'll spend a bit of time talking about how you can make your web application secure in this course. There's 4 different metrics that we use in order to measure your mastery of the concepts within the course. The first one is we're going to introduce a whole bunch of instruction topics to you. And then with some of those topics, there's assignments associated with it. So you learn the topic, you do a quick assignment. That's usually something between 15 minutes to an hour that you'll experiment with that. And then you'll turn those in so that you can gain hands-on experience with those technologies. The next is what's called Simon. This is my example application for how to implement all of the technologies that I previously talked about. I'll give you the code for that. There's actually a GitHub repository that you can clone and bring down and experiment with on your computer. And then you'll push that project up to your own web server so that you're actually hosting Simon on your web server. From that, you'll be able to take what you've learned from the assignments and from Simon and build your own startup application. So this is your application that you define how you want it to work, what you want it to be, and actually build it completely from scratch from what you've learned within the assignments and also within from the examples that Simon gives you. And then the final part is just some simple exams. We'll do a midterm and a final, which tests you on some basic concepts that we've taught in class. But the real mastery for this course is really demonstrated by what you do within your startup application. GitHub, as I mentioned before, is where we'll store our instruction, and also we'll have our demo repositories. That's where all the Simon repositories are. And this is also where you'll store your work on your startup application. So you want to make sure that you go up to GitHub. Today would be a great day to do it, along with creating your Amazon Web Services account. Also go create your GitHub account if you don't already have one, and look around there and get familiar with that. You're going to be using GitHub quite a bit in this class. I want to make a plea at this point that web application is an entirely dynamic activity. It requires a lot of energy, and the more energy you bring to it, the more exciting it is, not only for yourself, but everyone who's involved. So as you study these topics, as you talk about them socially, on the chat channels or within class or with me personally or with the TAs, bring your energy, get excited about it. The more you get excited about it, the less oppressive it feels and the more awesome it is. It's a creative activity. Building a website is like, chiseling an artwork out of marble. It's something that will stand, for lots of people to use, can be reached anywhere in the world. And that's exciting. That's awesome. Like, what else could you do in your life that could be literally seen by everyone in the world and provide incredible value? So bring your energy. The other thing I want to remind you is that web application development can be extremely frustrating. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of little pieces that have to be understood and hooked together in order to make the technology all work together to build a global, effective web application. So you should expect that you're going to make mistakes. It's just not something that happens without making mistakes. The key here is to make sure that you create a safe environment so that when you make mistakes, you can go down the wrong path for 15 minutes or maybe an hour and revert back to something that's stable and try something different so that you don't get stuck by that mistake. That's where things like GitHub really come into play. If you're committing the changes that you make when you hit a milestone or when you have some sort of stable state, and then you go and make a mistake, no problem. You just roll back to that previous commit, start over, you're going to move forward. My philosophy is that if you're not making mistakes, you're not really learning. And so don't worry about making mistakes, embrace them, and just build a safety network such that you can make mistakes without killing yourself or becoming too frustrated. All right. Let's actually talk about what it is to build a little web application. So I'm going to demonstrate 3 technologies here. I'm going to demonstrate HTML, CSS, and also JavaScript. And I'm doing that with this simple application. What this is you can see you've got this card with a glowing background. And when you click on it, it says, wow, magic. And that's pretty much it. It's not an application like you'd expect, like, Pinterest or Amazon.com or Instagram or whatever, but it is definitely a web application. The source code for this that I'm going to demonstrate here is also available within the instructions. So if you go out to the GitHub repository and click on the introduction section topic, you'll actually have a pointer to this actual source code here that you can also experiment with. So I'm just going to click on this here, and it will navigate me over to the source code that's being hosted in an online sandbox product called CodePen. CodePen allows you to quickly write HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and see over here on the right-hand side what those languages are actually doing, so you can quickly iterate and play with it. And then you take that and go put it on your own web server to actually host it. So I'm going to start here with the HTML. This is the HTML that actually produces this card that we're seeing over here. And it's pretty simple. I'm going to slide this over a little bit so that we don't wrap. And you'll see that we've got a few tags. These tags, a start tag for the body element right here, and also the close tag designated with the / on there is the close tag for the body element. So the body element in HTML represents everything that is rendered within the web browser. So that's everything from the top left-hand corner here all the way down to the bottom right-hand corner here. That's my body element, is that right there. Within that body element, I've got this card, which is represented by what's called a div or a division element. And that div or division element has several attributes, 2 of them, that are associated with it. The first one is I'm saying this div is classified or has a class attribute of card. That's what it's representing, is a card. And it also has an on-click handler. So it says when a user clicks on this div element, I want you to call the JavaScript function title click. So execute that JavaScript right here. So those are 2 attributes on the div element. And then between the start div element tag and the close div element tag, I actually have some text that's displayed as a child of that element, and that's click now. And you can see that represented here as click now within it. Then underneath that, I've got an anchor tag that starts here, has 3 different attributes on it, and then it contains a child text element that says Web Programming 260, and then the close tag on the anchor element. Now, an anchor element in HTML represents all those hyperlinks that you're always clicking on to navigate to things. So I can actually come here, and you'll see my cursor changes to a pointer index, which means I can click on this and it'll do something. Now, what is it going to do when I click on that? Well, that's what these attributes do. So the class just tells how I want it styled. I want it to be styled as muted text. That's the classification for it that I've assigned to it. And then the href attribute, or the hypertext reference attribute, points to the URL that I want to go to or navigate to when you click on this element. And then the final attribute here is a target of blank, which means that when you navigate that link, I want it to open up the result in a new web browser page rather than replacing the existing one. So that's what that attribute means. So I can actually come here and click on this now, and you'll see that I get navigated over into our instruction for the course. This is GitHub demonstrating the course instruction. I can give you a quick intro to what's actually displayed here. You got your instruction. So these are all the different topics that we're going to cover in the course. And also I've got a hyperlink here to the Simon applications, one for each one of the different technologies that we're going to demonstrate. And I've also got the course slides. So if you want to look at the slides that we use in the in-person conversations, then those are there. So that's the 10-second tour of the GitHub instruction repository. So, and that's where that link took us when we clicked on it. Now I can change these. So if I want to change it from click now to say something like press here, then I can just change that text here and CodePen will recognize that change happened, refresh the page, and now you can see that I've actually changed that. I can also add in something else. If I want to put like a paragraph of text and say hello class, I can go and add that in there. So P is a paragraph, and I've got my open and close tag, and you can see that that actually appears down here at the bottom with my open class. So that's the structure represented by HTML. Now if I go look at the styling, so if we look at the CSS, we've got several different sections to this. And each one of these is like a selector that we're selecting, and then we're telling what we want to style that particular thing. So I'm selecting the body element that was demonstrated in the HTML, so this element right here, and I'm going to put some different styles on it. So I'm telling how tall I want it to be. I'm telling what background color I actually want on there. I'm talking about how much padding I want around it and so forth. So I can actually change this. So I can change it from this color here, which is an RGB color. Each one of these two numbers here are representing different colors. So red, 21 of red, 25 of green, and 34 of blue. So I can change those to be 21 of red, and then 0 of green and 0 of blue, and that's going to change my color there on my background. So I get this magenta color instead of what I actually had there. I kind of actually like that one, not too bad. Or I can use textual representation, so I can say I want it to just be white and put that there. And then when that saves, we'll actually get it displayed as white. All right, I'm going to change that back to what it was because I really do like the original one. And let's go look at a different element. So here I'm selecting dot card. So the dot means I'm selecting one of those classification notes that I put in the HTML. So if we go back to our HTML, we'll see that the div element has a class of card. So this is the one I'm going to be operating on here. So back to the CSS, we can see that it also has background. So I can do the same thing I did above, and I can change that to white if I want for the background, and that will change and make that white. I can also come down and change, where I want things to be oriented. So if I don't want the text to be centered, I can say I want it to be put at the start of the element, and that will move it over to the start there. And I can also align it so that instead of being aligned to the middle there, I can also put that to the start, and that puts it up at the start both horizontally and vertically. Kind of like it back the way it was, so I'm going to put that back. This border radius element tells me how curved I want the borders to be right here. So they're barely curved right now. I can actually make that much more curved if I make it 60 pixels instead of just 6. And you'll see that that actually really rounds my corners there. And so you can do textual styling. You can also do styling on the elements themselves and all sorts of other cool things. I can also change the font. So right now it's this weird cursive font. I can change that so I can actually make it like a sans serif font. And that will change it there, yeah, so that it's actually a sans serif font instead of the cursive one. I kind of like the cursive. I'm going to put it back. I can also change the pointer. So when I move my mouse over this, you can see it's changing to the pointer, indicating that you can actually press on it. So if I wanted to get rid of that, I can just delete that style from there. And now I can go ahead and move my cursor back over it, and I don't actually get that, that cursor change anymore. So I want that one definitely, so I'm going to put that back. So now it's back to the little pointer cursor. And now we've got another style going on here. So this one is actually interesting because it's saying I want you to select that card, that element with the card class on it, and I want you to inject some new HTML content in front of it, or behind it, before it. So the content I'm actually injecting is nothing. I'm just doing this so that I can actually create this little border, this glowing border around it. So you can see that its width and its height is a little bit bigger than its parent width and height. And I can demonstrate this by making it even bigger. So if I make this 114 and 112 instead of that, then that border is going to actually grow a little bit there, and you can see that happening. I can actually play with the border radius just like we did before. So I can change this to like 18 instead of the 8, and it's going to be a little bit more curved than it was before. You just see that barely slip in there. This right here is the background image, and I'm defining this coloring around here using this line gradient thing. So it's specifying the 3 different colors that I actually want to mix into there, and then I want it to define as linearly gradient. Now it's spinning around in a circle here. And so that's actually done with this animation element down at the bottom. So it's saying I want to do a spin animation. I want it to happen every 2.5 seconds, and I want it to happen linearly so it doesn't, it's smoothly done around in a circle. And I want it to be infinite. So I can actually stop this by just changing the name here so it's not valid anymore, and the animation will stop. And you can see now it's locked into place with those colors showing that were defined here with the linear gradient background. So that shows you how cool it can get. I mean, you can really get powerful with cascading style sheets to do some really cool stuff. One other thing here is you've got a style that's happening based upon how the user interacts with it. So this is, I'm going to select the card element, and then I'm going to control what happens when the mouse hovers over it. So when I put the mouse over it, notice the background actually disappears. So what I'm doing is I'm setting the color there, and I'm setting the transition to go to this color over 1 second. So it takes this one is for this color right here. So you can see if I move the cursor over it, that it slightly changes to this lighter shade of blue. So if I wanted it to be more obvious what that color changes, let's go ahead and put it to green. And let that change there, and then I can move my cursor over it and you can see there you go. Now it moves to green. So that's the hover over it when it goes to green. But you've also got a hover going on here that changes the animation. So it sets the animation to none. I want it to stop animating, and it sets the opacity to 0. So it actually, when I hover over it, that border disappears. I could also do something by just like setting the display to be none so that it actually just disappears, and that'll do the same thing. So if I cover over it now, notice my animation, or that background element that I injected in there, disappears when I hover over it. So you can see how you can do really powerful things. The last thing I want to show is like this anchor tag, so we can style that one too. That's this one down here at the bottom. And you can see that it's got a shortened indication of the RGB value using FFF, so that's like all white. I can change that to be something a little more interesting. So I can put 0 in here, then it's going to be a mix of both the red and the green, which gives us that little teal color. You can see I've got text decoration none, so it's actually overriding the default browser rendering of that. Usually when you have a hyperlink, an anchor tag, it will put an underline on it, but I took that off by saying I didn't want the underline with none, but I can restore that by just removing that. And now we'll get our line back on there. Our color down here on the bottom, that looks horrible, so let's add a new style. Remember, we called that under a paragraph element, P, and we can actually set our color here to be like, white, to make that show up a little bit more. And maybe I want to make it a little bit bigger too, so I'm going to change the font size to be like 3EM, which is 3 sizes the normal letter M, and bam, it gets a lot bigger. I love that. All right, so that's a demonstration of the CSS and how you can use that to style. Now the thing we're missing is when you actually click on this press here, it says Wow Magic, and where's that coming from? If we go back and look at our HTML, there's no Wow Magic anywhere in this. All we have is this on click. We'll call this function called title click. And that's what happens down in the magic of the JavaScript. So if I go look here, I actually define that function that was called when you click on it. So title click is defined right there. And what happens when that is clicked on is it will find the element that is marked. So it's going to do this query selector on the document that has a class called card. And that will find this element right here that has a class called card. And once it grabs that element from the browser, it will say, I want to set the text content to something different. I want to set it to Wow Magic. And we can make this something else just to show how this works. So I'm going to just change this to be Hello CS260. And now, once we come over and we press on it, I can see that it's actually displaying Hello 260. So that's actually interacting. Some user does some action within the browser, and we can do something with the code to do it. You can consider how this might be much more complex, like it might call off to some server in Bangladesh and actually order a car for you, and then take pictures of something that's happening in Leningrad. No, sorry, that doesn't work. In Moscow, and those pictures are sent back to you. It can do anything in the world that you want it to do by using JavaScript to actually execute that. So that's our demo application working there. And once again, I'd encourage you to look at the instruction in GitHub. Find the link to this sandbox here and experiment with it. Try it. You can't break anything, and so feel free to try whatever you'd like there. So that pretty much wraps up everything I wanted to talk about today. We're glad you're here. We're glad you're part of the class, and I'm looking very much forward to working with you on your exciting adventure through the world of web programming.